Welcome to Future Epoch, where we learn more about our world. For most of human history, the great powers of the world competed over territory, trade routes, and natural resources. Then they competed over nuclear weapons, satellites, and semiconductors. Today, the most consequential competition is one most people never see. It is happening inside server farms, inside university research labs, inside government ministries, and inside the boardrooms of a small number of companies that have accumulated more computing power than entire nations. The competition is over artificial intelligence, and more specifically, over who gets to control it. This is not simply a story about technology. It is a story about power. AI sovereignty is the idea that nations, not corporations, not international bodies, but nations, should have meaningful control over the artificial intelligence systems operating within their borders and shaping the lives of their citizens. It encompasses questions about where data is stored and who can access it, about who manufactures the chips that power AI systems, about which governments can regulate AI behavior, and about who benefits when AI creates economic value. The concern is not abstract. AI systems now influence credit decisions, medical diagnoses, criminal sentencing, hiring processes, and national security assessments. When those systems are designed, trained, and operated by a foreign power or a foreign company subject to foreign law, the nation in which they operate has, in a meaningful sense, surrendered a degree of its sovereignty. The stakes are high enough that governments across the world have begun treating AI policy as a matter of national security. The roots of this competition run deeper than most people realize. In 2007, a short document published by the Chinese government changed the trajectory of global AI policy. China's New Generation Artificial Intelligence Development Plan set an explicit national goal to become the world leader in artificial intelligence by 2030. It was a declaration of intent backed by state investment, and it forced policymakers in Washington, Brussels, and London to confront a question they had been slow to ask. What is our strategy? The United States had long assumed that its dominance in technology was structural, the product of Silicon Valley culture, venture capital, and elite universities. But China's plan made clear that state-directed industrial policy could close the gap. By the early 2020s, Chinese researchers were publishing more AI papers than their American counterparts, and Chinese companies were deploying AI systems at scale across surveillance, logistics, and finance. The response in the West was not immediate, and it was not unified. The European Union moved toward regulation. The United States moved toward export controls. The United Kingdom positioned itself as a mediator, hosting the world's first AI Safety Summit at Bletchley Park in November 2023. That summit was significant for what it revealed as much as for what it achieved. Representatives from 28 countries, including China, signed the Bletchley Declaration, acknowledging that frontier AI posed serious risks and that international cooperation was necessary. But the summit also exposed deep disagreements about what sovereignty over AI actually means in practice, and whose version of safety should govern the technology's development. The central conflict in AI sovereignty is not simply between the United States and China, though that rivalry defines much of the landscape. The deeper conflict is between three competing visions of how AI should be governed, each with a different answer to the question, sovereign for whom? The American model has historically favored private innovation with light-touch government oversight, trusting that market forces and corporate self-governance will produce beneficial outcomes. The Chinese model involves deep integration between the state and the AI industry, with the government setting strategic direction, providing capital, and maintaining authority over what AI systems can and cannot say. The European model, codified in the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, the world's first comprehensive legal framework for AI, which came into force in 2024, takes a third path. It attempts to regulate AI by risk level, imposing strict requirements on high-stakes applications while permitting lower-risk uses to proceed with fewer constraints. The Act establishes rights for citizens, obligations for developers, and penalties for non-compliance that can reach €35 million or 7% of global annual turnover. But there is a tension that none of these models fully resolves. The countries with the most ambitious AI regulatory frameworks are not always the countries with the most advanced AI capabilities. The countries racing hardest to build those capabilities are not always racing with safety as their first priority. And the countries that bear the greatest risk from powerful AI systems, smaller, less wealthy nations with limited regulatory capacity, have the least influence over how the technology develops. This is the structural inequality at the heart of AI sovereignty. The rules are being written by the powerful, for the powerful. The consequences of this competition are already being felt in ways that extend far beyond the countries directly involved. Semiconductors sit at the center of the conflict. The most advanced AI chips in the world are designed primarily by American companies and manufactured almost exclusively in Taiwan, a geopolitical pressure point that no number of export controls can fully resolve. In October 2022, the United States introduced sweeping export controls designed to prevent advanced chips and chip-making equipment from reaching China. The controls were later expanded and tightened. The message was clear. Washington was prepared to use its position in the semiconductor supply chain as a geopolitical instrument. For countries outside the main rivalry, this creates a difficult choice. Aligning with American technology standards means accepting American terms and American oversight. Building sovereign AI capability from scratch requires resources and expertise that most nations simply do not have. And relying on Chinese AI platforms raises questions about data access, censorship, and dependency on a system designed around a different set of values. The Stanford AI Index, which tracks global AI development, has consistently shown that investment, talent, and research output remain heavily concentrated in a small number of countries. The risk is that as AI becomes more central to economic productivity, healthcare, education, and governance, the gap between AI-capable nations and the rest will widen into something that looks less like a technological divide and more like a new form of structural dependency. Digital colonialism by another name. There are also safety implications that cross every border. When nations race to deploy AI without adequate international coordination, the incentives push towards speed rather than caution. The Bletchley Declaration was a meaningful first step toward acknowledging that some AI risks transcend national interests. But a declaration is not a treaty, and good intentions are not governance. The concept of AI sovereignty is often framed in the language of national pride and strategic competition. That framing is not wrong, but it is incomplete. What AI sovereignty is really about is accountability. The question of who is responsible when an AI system causes harm, who can be held answerable when it produces biased or unjust decisions, and who has the authority to demand that it be changed. Those questions cannot be answered by a single company, no matter how large. They cannot be answered by the market alone. They require governance structures with democratic legitimacy, technical expertise, and genuine enforcement power. Building those structures, across borders, for technology that evolves faster than legislation can follow, is one of the defining challenges of this decade. The countries that get this right, that find a way to remain competitive while building systems of accountability that protect their citizens, will shape not just their own futures, but the norms by which AI develops everywhere else. The 21st century will be shaped by artificial intelligence in ways we are only beginning to understand. But the decisions that matter most are not technical decisions. They are political decisions. Who governs AI? By what rules? In whose interest? With what accountability? These are questions every generation asks about the technologies that define its era. They were asked about the printing press, about electricity, about nuclear power, and about the internet. History suggests that the answers depend less on the capabilities of the technology itself than on the political will of the people who must live with its consequences. The race for AI sovereignty is already underway. The question is not whether nations will assert control over artificial intelligence. They already are. The question is whether they will find a way to do so without fracturing the very international cooperation that the risks of the technology demand. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this content and want to see more, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel.